Now, we also looked at associations between household air pollution exposure and anthropometrics or growth in children, because we had serial anthropometric measurements in the children. In the first year of life, we measured weight, length, head circumference, arm circumference. So we did all this serially at birth, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and then 12 months. And then also when we began prospectively following up the cohort, we are doing that on an annual basis now. So we found that prenatal HAP exposure as indexed by CO was associated with higher odds of lower length for age Z-score and stunting. So the odds ratios represented here. And then, the blue table here represents the odds ratio, so the results for CO, and then this represents the results for PM2.5. These results are for prenatal exposures, right? And then for the postnatal exposures, so postnatal CO and PM2.5 were associated with smaller head circumference, smaller mid-upper arm circumference, and lower weight for length Z-scores. So over the first year of life, right, from birth to the first birthday. So the key takeaways are that we show evidence of the impacts of household air pollution on birth weight, on pneumonia, on lung function, child growth, and blood pressure. So additional analysis are underway. The cohort, we're continuing to follow up the cohort. So as I mentioned, we're doing some biomarker work, we are doing some microbiome work, and additional analysis are ongoing. All these support the hypothesis that prenatal and early life exposures set the stage for lifelong health. So if you remember the graphs I showed earlier, so if exposures in utero and in early life are causing alterations in lung function, in blood pressure at this early stage, these abnormal physiological states could then increase the risk of chronic diseases later in life. Next steps for the cohort. So as I mentioned, we also adding ambient monitoring to our personal air pollution measurements. So we have the e-sampler, we have BAM, thanks to Dan, and then we've also deployed module airs in the study communities. So I'd like to thank the study team members from Kintampo, from Columbia, from Sinai in New York, and also to acknowledge our funders. Thank you. Yes, please.
Good morning. From your slides, you said you were doing the cohort from birth to the age 13. So I wanted to know, those you started with from age 0 and to age 4, are you still using the same number or is getting reduced? And up to 13, what's your projection if the numbers will reduce?
Okay, thank you very much for that. So the original cohort, so as I mentioned, we had about 1,300 live births from the pregnancy cohort. And then for the original graphs, we followed them until the first birthday. And then when the children turned 4 years, we recruited a subset of that into the prospective child follow-up. So that number is around 700. So from 4 years, we've been following them up. The cohort is now at an average age of 9 years. And the retention rate is quite high. It's around 90% now. So we are about 5 years into the follow-up, right? So we just got additional funding to continue following them up until 13 years, right? We have community engagement strategies. It's a study area that we've and community leaders over a long period of time. We enjoy good rates and retention.
Lovely talk. I've got a question there. So it's interesting you controlled for malaria prevalence in your data, sensibly so. I was wondering if air pollution itself could be protective towards malaria, as in the smoke, etc.
Yeah. So yeah, we had that question. So in the graphs, yeah. So there's the hypothesis that air pollution or smoky stoves could be protective against malaria because they could drive away mosquitoes. So we have a separate analysis of that. We did published a paper last year that showed that there was no effect of air pollution on malaria reduction, at least in the moms.
Yeah, that ties in. We did a similar study looking at indoor versus outdoor cooking, and we saw no, where you might expect more air pollution indoors versus outdoors, but we saw no effect of malaria.
Yeah, no. So the analysis we did was on placental malaria. So I've been looking at the intervention, so we could have an exposure contrast during pregnancy, right? And then we related this to placental malaria, but there was no effect.
Any more?
Yeah, I'm just curious about things. I don't know much about these studies. This is fluctuating, sorry. Maybe I'll just yell. One is, I'm curious, during the course of the study, if you come across a child that's sick from these respiratory illnesses or cardiovascular problems, do you provide treatment? Like, I'm wondering how the ethics of that, right? I imagine providing treatment doesn't affect the long-term study, or how does that work? And my other question is, if you're involving the Ministry of Health here in the study, because we have this struggle with, the focus on, dealing with the problem after the fact rather than preventative health. And I'm wondering if there's any buy-in to these kinds of interventions now that you've accumulated such impressive data, so that the Ministry of Health would be involved in actually addressing this at source.
Okay, so thanks for your questions. So, yeah, first, the ethics of providing treatment if we find a sick child. Yes, so we were treating the kids, so especially during the intervention phase. So because we were actively looking for pneumonia cases and other childhood illnesses. Yeah, so I mean, ethically, if you look for it and you find it, you have to treat, or you have to provide an avenue for treatment. Yeah, so we did that. For now, the observational study, the prospective follow-up, if we detect anything abnormal, like a high blood pressure, so we make sure that we counsel the moms, and then we advise them to go to the nearest health center to seek care. And then the second question, so buy-in from the Ministry of Health. Yes, so we've engaged the Ministry of Health, we've engaged the Ministry of Energy. So the Ghana Ministry of Energy is formulating its policy on clean energy in use in households. And this study provided some of the evidence for them to formulate that policy. So they have a policy to try to improve uptake of LPG in households.
Okay, thank you for this very wonderful lecture. My question is more on the economic side of things. From your lecture, you told us that it's more profitable to use gas as against using firewood and all of that. And yesterday, by the time we got back to our lodge, I was hungry. I had to step out to buy bread. And I bought a loaf of bread for 20 cedis. Now that prompted me wanting to find out more. How much is the minimum wage in Ghana? And I discovered the daily minimum wage in Ghana is 18.15 cedis, as against times 27 days, which is 490.05 cedis. Now, meaning that my entire day's work cannot buy me a loaf of bread in Ghana. Now, how then are we encouraging these persons to move away from using of firewood that I know that is way cheaper to using gases?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, I mean, so the question of affordability always comes in, right? But there have been some studies to look at how access can be improved and how the cost can be driven down. So my colleague is here, Dr. Suleiman. He's been involved in some work that we've done in KHRC to look at different models that we can use to try to reduce cost, for people to make it more affordable. So, Wise, if you don't mind, if you can speak a bit more to that.